This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
If you're a guest with us, again, welcome. Our bent around here is we gather and we scatter, and what we mean by that is we value Sunday mornings. We think that Sunday morning's still relevant, still helpful, still helps us explore. You guys can go if you'd like. Sorry. But thank you for leading us. Still helps us explore who Jesus is and what he's about, and we try to create safe experiences for you no matter what you believe about God or Jesus and life, a place where you can explore that. And yet what we mean by the scattering piece is we're constantly trying to remind ourselves that to be the church, it would kind of be easier if all we had to do was this, you know? I don't know about you, but I wish all I had to do was think correct thoughts about God, and unfortunately that's not the case, is what we're constantly reminding ourselves, that what really matters is the character that we put on and when we walk out of here, and the way we interact with coworkers and friends and neighbors, and the way we treat people. And in particular, for those of us that do have confidence in Jesus, what we recognize is that he says the way you express your love is by the sacrifice of your own life for others, by serving others. And so it's kind of the bent around here is we gather, but we don't like church that much, so we only gather once a week, and we try to spend the other 6 days out there trying to be the church. And the Easter egg hunt then is really an expression of that. That is kind of a compliment or a vote of confidence, because we didn't ever really set out to say like, hey, let's do an Easter egg hunt. What happened there was Touchmark or the Waterford. Can I just call it the Waterford? Are we okay with that? And can we start a petition that says you cannot change your name unless you're Prince? Anyway, with the Waterford, Touchmark, whichever one, they approached us a few years ago and said, hey, we would like to host an Easter egg hunt. And their vision was recognizing that that's a retirement community, and so they wanted to put as many young families and kids on the campus as they could, just to kind of breathe some life into their residents. And of course, hopefully also draw residents' families to that event, because there was an event for their families to attend there. And the compliment that they paid us was, we hear you guys are good at getting people to serve, and so what if we mostly financially facilitate the deal and you show up and serve? And so that was 2 years ago now, and we said, sure, that'd be great. And so that would be one expression of what we mean by scattering. And if you're someone that wants to connect around here, then to be honest, we kind of make it difficult. Again, mostly because we try not to just gather all the time and do this. What we say is, let's serve together. Maybe that's because I'm a man and I'd much rather do something physical where I don't have to look you in the eye, and you know what I mean? It's just more comfortable, right? I don't know. Anyway, so come scatter with us if you'd like to connect, and if you don't want to connect, you can look at your feet there too, and if you like being a fly on the wall, we'd like to create space for that as well. And then there's the stuff this week with regard to stuffing Easter eggs. That's always a blast. You feel like you're in junior high again, because inevitably someone starts throwing candy across the room, and so it's kind of productive and kind of fun all at the same time. And then the Narrate kids are dyeing Easter eggs as well. So put all that out there for you. Should be a blast. Easter on Sunday. Easter on Sunday. Really? It's cliche, I know, but it's March. This morning what I want to do is I'd like to finish up a series this morning that we started several weeks ago. It's a series that we've been calling Finding Your Balance. And if you haven't been with us this far, what we've been saying is that there are these laws of physical balance that really parallel the laws of financial balance. And I realize again that if you're a guest, you're like, really? I knew it. That's all you people talk about is money. And I get it. I understand the criticism. It's not all we talk about. But here's where this is born out of for me personally is, I have meetings with people. I sit at coffee shops with people. I read emails about marriages. And what I know is what you know, and that is that very few things wreck relationships quite like finances can wreck relationships. Very few things can sabotage a marriage the way finances where two people are on the same page can sabotage a marriage. And so if you just hear me this morning, if you're a guest, and I know I'm playing into a stereotype, but I would just challenge you to hear me out, because what we're going to talk about this morning, it deals with money, but I think you'll see that it also deals with a lot more than that. So what we've been talking about are these 3 laws, just to kind of review, of physical balance. The first law we said is that if you're going to balance something, you have to have a what? Remember? If you're going to balance something, you got to have a reference point. Fantastic. You've got to have that place that you stare at. It's why when you're crossing a lake, when you're on or a creek, when you're backpacking and you're trying to get across and your wife tries to have a conversation with you, you sound very unchristian there for a split second, right? Because you can't engage in anything else. All of your focus is lasered because you got to focus on something. And what we said is if you're going to balance something, you have to focus on something. And when it comes to finances, if you're going to balance your money, then maybe it sounds intuitive, but it really isn't all that normal. You've got to focus on your money. You got to know where your money's going. And the challenge that we talked about there is that all of us, if we really want to be balanced financially, probably need to come up with, we need to come up with some type of system by which we track our expenses and our bills and what we make, and that we can look back on any month or any year and go, here's where my money went. Because especially if you're a spiritual person, that's what you are, is you're a manager of somebody else's stuff. And if you had a financial manager who you asked like, hey, how much money did I spend on acquisitions last year? And they said, well, I'm not really sure. You'd go fired, like, right? It'd be done. So anyway, so there's the reference point. The second law we said is if you're going to balance something, then you've got to have a clear objective. And that one's tricky because when it comes to money, what we said is what's the moral compass through which we can guide with which we can guide all of our financial decisions. And we recognize that there's lots of possibilities. There's providing for our family. There's making lots of money. There's saving lots of money. There's giving lots of money. There's spending lots of money. Nobody says that's their goal, but it oftentimes is our goal. And what we said is any of those, they're really insufficient, that they don't capture the whole process, the whole issue. And what we said is particularly, and admittedly, this one's very Christian. It's very Bible-centric, it's very Christ-follower-centric, and that is that we said that, the clear objective is to honor God. Not with a percentage, but with all of it. And that doesn't mean we give it all, but what we said is if we're going to ask the question from the text, God, what's the clear objective? He would say, well, it's mine. It's given to you by me. It all belongs to me, so your job is to manage all of it. And so the question we came out of that week with was just the challenge to say, like, what would it look like, God, for me to honor you with everything? The third law of physical balance that we've been talking about deals with the idea of constant corrections. That if you'll notice, anytime you're balancing something, you constantly have to be making corrections. And so what we've observed is that with finances, unfortunately, you don't just get to come up with a budget, you don't just get to come up with a process and walk away from it for the next several decades, that you're constantly making corrections. And we've talked about two. We talked about debt, and suggested that many of us need to make a correction to the way we think about and quote-unquote leverage debt. And then last week we talked about our extra, which none of us had any, so that was a short weekend. Really what we explored last weekend was that the way we interact with our extra says something about our strategy for happiness, and the warning that Jesus gives us is be careful. Because if you treat it all like you've got to have all of it to be happy, then that's paramount of saying life consists of the abundance of our possessions. And you'll hit moments in your life where you are reminded that life does not consist of the abundance of your possessions. It consists of the quality of your relationships. So that was last week. What I want to do this morning is kind of wrap this whole thing up. That's why we went with the telethon motif with the balloons. Just kind of feel that? John had to point that out to me. It's kind of like a telethon. Actually wasn't from us at all. The Grand Street had an event on Friday night, and we thought, oh, balloons, that's nice. We'll leave them there. There's pretzels and Ritz crackers downstairs, too, if you'd like to partake. What I want to do this morning is wrap it all up by offering a simple plan for thinking about your personal finances. Now, if you're a Christ follower, what we're going to do is look at the Old and the New Testament, and I think make a couple observations from a couple texts that really lay out in pretty simple terms how to prioritize our finances. If you're not, maybe you're a God person but not really sure what to do with Jesus, or maybe you were drug here, you were promised lunch afterwards, and you're not really sure what to do with any of it. My hope for you this morning is that, if nothing else, it's a financial lecture. It's a financial 2 cents. My hope is that you can glean something from it. That ultimately it'll challenge the way you think about your finances, because if you leave here and decide not to follow Jesus, okay, that's your deal, and I'm not necessarily going to beg you to do that. But if you leave here and you begin to make some corrections to your finances, I think you can find Jesus on the path of just thinking the way he thinks about money. So I digress. That was off the script. So the simple plan requires that we first consider this. I think that there's 5 things we can do with money. We can spend it. We can repay debts with it. We're all pretty good at spending. Depending on how good we are at spending, depends on how much repaying of debts we do. We can pay taxes with it. Hopefully you're doing that. The authorities frown upon it when you don't. You can save it, and you can give it. There's 5 things you can do. Spend it. We're all pretty good at that. Make payments on things that you already spent, even things that don't work anymore, but you had to have them, and now they don't work, and you still owe money on them. You can pay taxes. You'll go to prison if you don't do that. You can save some, and if there's still some left over, you can give some. Now my question, and at the risk of putting too much of a bony finger in your chest, which is not my intent. It sounds kind of, dare I say, prickish, but that's not really my desire, though I do think my job is to challenge, and I think when it comes to finances, we have to go there. My question is, does that represent your financial priorities? Like, I spend, I make payments on things I already bought, I pay taxes because that wouldn't go well if I didn't. If there's anything left, I give, and if there's anything left after that, or if there's anything left after that, I save, and if there's anything after that, I give. I think that's the mindset of the default mindset. I don't think it's an American thing. I don't think it's a 21st century thing. I don't think it's a male thing or a female thing or a Helena thing. I think it's a human thing. Because what the text tells us is that the central issue, the central reason for brokenness is selfishness. And so it just makes sense that when we take the issue of money, which empowers us more than anything else perhaps that we could have, it would make sense that we would begin to put ourselves first. That's the issue in the garden. So I ask, does that represent your priorities? I spend, I make payments, I pay taxes. If there's anything left, I give, or I save. If there's anything left after that, I give. Let me frame it this way, in case that wasn't abrasive enough. If that's the case, what our priorities are me, America, me, and others. Let me just say that again because that's kind of rocket science. Me, America, me, and if you're not a spiritual person, others, and if you are, God and others. Which means that others, that God, they get your leftovers. Because really what we're saying is, if I haven't spent it, if I don't have to make payments on stuff I already bought, if the government doesn't take it all, nasty government, if I haven't decided to save it, if there's anything left after that, then I will give it. Now, here's really the issue that I want to explore this morning. I think, let me stop there. Just stop and think of this, though. Does that, even if that does reflect your priorities, does it prevent you from, in a time of financial crisis, saying, Lord, I need some help here? Like for most of us, our mindset is me, oh yeah, and others. But yet, if you're anything like me, when we have car problems and we don't have a savings account for it, that doesn't keep us from saying, oh, Lord, please have the mechanic offer to fix it for free. Or when we have a house to sell, it doesn't keep us from going, Lord, please sell the house, please sell the house. Come on, Lord, you're sovereign. You can sell this stinking house, sell the house. It doesn't keep us from saying, Lord, I really need the job, or Lord, they really need the scholarship, or I really need to get my kids through college. There's some irony there then, isn't there? That essentially what happens is we put ourselves first, and then we say to God, God, would you please get involved in my finances? And I think God says, and this is always risky to put words in God's mouth, I think God says, help you what? Well, help me take care of me. Oh, fantastic. I love doing that, right? Like, God, help me. Help you what? Help you take care of yourself. Think of it this way. Spending is a habit. We more or less have a system for that. We don't have to think about it like you could spend money without trying, right? Making payments, the banks, the credit card companies, they make sure you have a system. The government, you'll find out very quickly from behind bars that they also prefer that you have a system. Saving, many of you work for employers who graciously provide a system for saving. But giving, random, completely spontaneous, entirely unplanned. Now here's kind of therefore the issue that I'd like to explore this morning. What if there are ways of prioritizing things that effectively shut the door on God's involvement, and there are ways of prioritizing things that open wide the door to God's involvement in our lives? Now you go, oh, Adam, that is so convenient that God would use money to have this conversation. Like, how convenient of him, how convenient of you. Okay, so tell your boss that you know he values you. Don't worry about what he pays you. I know you value me. Don't worry about putting me in any kind of priority within the pay stream. It works very much the same way. So what if there are ways of prioritizing our finances that shut the door on God's involvement, and there's ways of prioritizing them that open the door, not as a get-rich scheme, not as a name-it-claim-it scheme, but it open the door in such a way that God is welcomed to be involved and actually enjoys being involved and actually is giddy about being involved. This is kind of what I want to explore this morning. And what I want to suggest to you is that spend first, give last. I think that represents a closed door. And if you're someone here and you've got a young family or you're a single person or whatever and your finances are a wreck and you're going like, what the heck? I think maybe it's worth considering this morning if your financial priorities aren't shutting God out of your financial life. And changing those priorities perhaps would welcome him to be more involved in them. Now, what I want to do is explore two passages. There's one in Malachi, and if you're not familiar with the Bible, Malachi, one of my favorite speakers calls him the Italian prophet Malachi. You have to think about that for a second. Malachi is the last prophet in the Old Testament, so pre-Jesus. Malachi is one of these stereotypical guys with his hair standing straight up and his eyes ablaze, and he was screaming at everybody with a megaphone. He was a prophet sent by God to Israel, not to the Gentile nations, but to Israel, and his message to them was quite harsh. And really what his message was you guys aren't prioritizing right. You guys, you might be giving, but it's your last priority. And if you give the whole book a fair hearing, and we won't have time to do that this morning, essentially what he's saying to them is the sheep that you offer, you're like, you offer a sheep. You offer the one that got tangled in the fence, one that you would never consider butchering for a feast for your friends, one that you would never offer as a gift to a family member. That's the one you bring. You're bringing some grain, but the grain you're bringing is the stuff that you don't even want to eat. And he challenges them on this issue of priority. So I'm going to start in Malachi chapter 3. It says, ever since the time of your ancestors, you've turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you. It's a tricky thing to so you hear what God's saying there, right? Like, return to me, and I'll return to you. In other words, there's a cause and effect. There are ways that you do things that causes me to turn away from you, and there are ways that you could do things that would cause me to turn toward you. But you ask, which is a reasonable question, how are we to return? What do you mean return to you? How have we gone anywhere? We're still bringing our sheep. They just have a broken leg. What's the big deal? You're going to slaughter them anyway. Like, how do we return to you? What does that even look like? To which God says, will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? Didn't know I could do that. Could you please enlighten me? What does that look like to rob you? To which Malachi says, in tithes and offerings. Now that word tithe and offering, I realize that's a stumbling block. The word tithe, if you translate it literally, means tenth. And you may or may not be familiar with then at this time in Israel's history, I forget, it's like 300 or 400 years before Christ. What we have going on here were a people who they did in fact give. They gave 10%. No, actually they gave 20%. They had a double tithe. The first 10% of everything they raised, of everything they grew, of whatever they earned via the family trade, the first 10% went to the temple. And that 10%, it went to the temple to make the temple system happen. It went to support the priests and the Levites. It went to provide the animals and the grains. I mean, there was a very large infrastructure, and the 10% was how it went forward. The second 10%, so already they're only living on 80% at most, and Rome took 70-some, so there's 10%. The second 10%, what they did was every year they set it aside, and they collected it. They saved it up. It was each family's responsibility to hold aside 10%, and then once a year, they would have a giant party. Think Christmas. And it was a celebration, the purpose of which was to honor God. And so the idea was you'd hold back 10% of your grain reserves and 10% of your wine and 10% of all that stuff, and then you'd have this giant party within your community. That happened every 2 years. Every third year, that second 10% was it was saved up, and then it was distributed to the poor in the local community, which, of course, their communities were a lot smaller than ours, and so that system would have been a little bit easier to lead then. So they knew about the tithe, and yet Malachi is saying to them, hold on, you're robbing God. How are we robbing you? Well, you're giving, but you're not really prioritizing. Listen to the way he continues. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you're robbing me. Now, again, those are harsh words. God has just told these people you're under a curse, and some of you are going, what happened to this God who my friend told me, like, he loves me, and this guy's cursing people? Well, the deal here for Israel, We talked about this at the beginning of the series, was that when they first came out of Egypt and they were first being led through the desert, God made a deal with them. He said, you honor me and I'll bless you. Dishonor me and I'll curse you. And it's a very cause and effect relationship, but the rationale for that relationship was pretty simple. What God is saying is, hey, listen, I want the surrounding nations to look at you and say, what is going on? Why are things so well for them? Why are they so healthy? Why is all this stuff happening the way it is? And I want people to go, it's because of who their God is. And so if you obey me and you honor me, I'm going to bless you. And if you disobey me and dishonor me, I'm going to curse you. And Malachi is going, you guys are cursed. You're cursed. You're not honoring God. See, really what's going on here, well, we'll just continue. He says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. So you're giving, but it's not really your priority. That there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. Incidentally, that's the only place in the Bible where God invites you to test him. It's the only place in the Bible where God invites anybody to test him, to say it more accurately. It's not to be confused with tempt. James talks about do not tempt God, and there the issue is coming up with a plan and saying, God, now you got to participate with it. This is different. Malachi is saying to them, hey guys, you're cursed. Why are you cursed? Because you're not putting God first. So put God first. Try it. See what happens when you do. See, what he's saying to them is, guys, God doesn't want to be your last priority. When you make him your last priority, you are closing the door on his involvement in your life. Guys, God wants to be your first priority, your primary priority. That's what's going on here. And again, you go, God just wants your money. He just wants their money. This is a really convenient way for a bunch of religious people to spiritualize the issue of giving money. And to be honest, that has been abused a lot. Places like this and people like me have taken advantage of this principle a lot. And part of what you have to judge is whether or not we're doing that. So setting aside the caution, the perils of it, what if what God understands is that the preeminent way that you express priority is financially? What if from cover to cover there's a very fair observation that says the preeminent way to understand someone's priority is to look at their checkbook? And again, I reference back to the boss thing. Like, that's not just a Jesus thing, that's not just a Bible thing, that's a you thing. You're grateful for the thank you cards from your boss and you're grateful for the pats on the back, but that doesn't necessarily give them permission to not pay you adequately and say, I so appreciate you. You'd go, no, if you appreciate me, then show me. Put your money where your mouth is. Now, here's kind of a theological bent of mine. You can agree with me or not on this. I don't think this is a promise to the United States of America. I think it's a promise to Israel. I don't think it's a promise to you and to me today. I think it's a promise to these people then. But it does reflect, in my opinion, a principle that goes from cover to cover in the Bible, and that is this: there are ways of prioritizing things that shut the door on God in your life, and there are ways of prioritizing things that open the door to God's involvement in your life. Now, when we get to the New Testament, nothing could be more clear than the fact that God wants to move in our direction. Nothing could be more clear than what God is saying is, man, if you'll just invite me, if you'll just invite me to move in your direction, I would love to do that. Jesus and his being sent to earth and his coming as a human and his life and death and resurrection, it's a gigantic testimony that God desires to move in our direction. The issue, the pressing issue, is who needs an ambulance? I don't know what we do here. The question of the New Testament is, what are you going to do? Will you invite God to move in your direction? C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest Christian theologians ever, he used to say that the doorknob out of hell is on the inside. And his point was, God doesn't send anyone to hell. It's a decision that people who separate themselves from God, that's has way more indicative of their posture and their desires than it is his. The issue is, will you open the door? Now, Jesus picks up this very same issue. And Jesus also says, hey, it's money It's money that it's by money that we can express to God that he's priority. Starting in verse 24. We looked at this earlier in the series. I just challenge you to kind of view it through the lens of priorities. He says, no one can serve two masters. You can't have two. You know that. If you've ever worked for somebody and it wasn't clear who the authority was, you know how miserable that is. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can only have one number one. Either your number one or its number one. Either its number one or your number one. You cannot serve both God and money. Notice what he says is the competition for your life is not between God and Satan. The competition for your life is between you and stuff. And you cannot like that, and you can be suspicious of the motives there. There's nothing I can do to help you there. All I can do is say, like, this is what Jesus says. Like, the tension is between your stuff and you and God. And then he goes on. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? What shall me eat? What shall me drink? What shall me... What is Jesus saying? Don't think you have to make yourself first priority. For the pagans run after all these things. People who don't even believe what you believe, they behave this way, and yet your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek, and what's the word there? But seek, what's the word? First. See, it's a priority thing. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Listen, if you don't hear another word this morning, please hear Matthew 6:33, because this isn't from me. This is a promise from Jesus. What he's saying is if you'll flip around the priorities, if you'll put others and God's kingdom first, then I'll take care of you. I'll take care of your needs. That's the promise. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Now, if you're a little calloused because you've heard of Christians with name it, claim it, or get rich quick theology, I get it. And to be sure, this is where it comes from. It's not a get rich plan, but it is God saying there are ways of prioritizing things that open the door to my involvement. And the preeminent way to express them is through your stuff. So about that simple plan, let me throw it out there, and you can decide in the weeks and months that follow whether or not you buy it. See, I think what Jesus is saying is flip it. Flip the whole thing around. Give first. Save for your future second. Pay your taxes third. Repay your debts fourth, and live on what's left. Give, save, pay your taxes, pay your debts, and live on what's left over. See, because what Jesus is saying here is if you'll reprioritize, you'll invite me to get involved. Or I think we can even simplify it a little bit more. We can just say this: give, save, live on the rest. Give, save, live on the rest. Give, save, live on the rest. Now, this, and the reason why I end this way, is if the point of this series is to talk about how do we accomplish financial balance, this is where it's at. This is where peace is at. This is the type of priority system that prevents finances from ruining an otherwise great marriage. This is the type of financial system that keeps an otherwise healthy, positive life from getting sidetracked and then making all kinds of compromising decisions because you're in financial trouble. This is how we accomplish the peace that God talks about financially. And you go, Adam, that's so convenient. You're just trying to get our money. Then don't give it here. I just can't stress this. Don't give it here. Take the principle and apply it somewhere else. Take the principle and burn 10% in a fire. I'm just challenging you. If you will choose to not put yourself first, you just watch and see what happens. I dare you. Best piece of, one more thought. If you're gonna do this, then it's gonna also require that you begin to think in terms of percentages. See, we tend to think in amounts. God doesn't think in amounts, he thinks in terms of percentages. Here's one thing I know about everybody in this room. You all live on a percentage of your income. We all do. And you go, I've never really thought about that. We all live on a percentage of our income. The question is, what percentage do you live on? I really thought about that, Adam. Let me think here. There's nothing left at the end of the payday. 100%, Adam, I live on 100%. That's okay. I mean, whatever. But it starts by going, what percentage do you live on? And if there's nothing left at the end of the month and you have a car payment and you have a credit card payment, then you're doing something that defies mathematics because you're living on like 130%. That means like you're actually living on more money than you make. You could teach a seminar, how to live on more money than you make. And we all know how the story ends. My challenge to you this morning, go home, figure out what percentage of your income are you living on. 100, 110, 120, 130, 50. Best piece of financial advice I ever received, and I know I've told this story already in this series, was when I heard Andy Stanley almost a decade ago say to a bunch of premarital couples, and it was kind of almost disrespectful. It was so sarcastic, but he said, hey, listen, I don't care if you both love Jesus. I don't care if you're going to do devotionals together. I don't care if you've already decided you're going to go to church every Sunday. If you want to know what's the most important decision that's going to lead to your marriage, either making it or not making it, here's what it is. Pre-decide what percentage of your income you're going to live on. Because if he wants to live on 120 and she wants to live on 80, good night. It'll be a wreck. And I got to tell you, the emails that I get, especially during this series, they all say that. I just got one last week. Adam, my whole life I've lived on 70% of what I make. She wasn't using those terms, but that was more or less what was being said. My husband, he's always lived on 120. And here we are, and now they're doing all these things that to her are embarrassing, and yet they're on the wrong page. If you do nothing else from this morning, go home and figure out what percentage of your income do you live on? And what percentage of your income do you want to live on? Because here's the other trick. If you don't decide, someone else will decide for you. Chances are, if you've never thought about this, you're already living on 130% because that's the way things turn. I heard a statistic a couple weeks ago that for every hour of TV you watch a week, your annual consumer spending goes up $100. And you hear that and you go, well, of course it does. And I would argue that doesn't make advertisers evil. That makes us stupid. Like, it's their job to sell us stuff. You can't hate them for doing their job. Self-control is your job, our job, not their job. So pre-decide. What percentage are you going to live on? I think that the ceiling is 80, that you live on, that you give 10 and you save 10. But however it fleshes out for you, God thinks in terms of percentages. And the one story that really captures that is this story in the book of Mark. There's this time where Jesus has his guys at the temple, and the temple was enormous. Our current metropolises and major theaters and things had nothing on it. And of course, as what happens with spirituality and church and religion, it's the thing that all of us are so gun-shy about. It became kind of this ornamental process, and there was a hierarchy, and there were these superficial ways of expressing love for God. And one of the major ones in Jesus' day was how much you gave. And there were these big cylinder, my understanding is they were these cylinder cones, and of course their money in this day, it was coins. They didn't have dollar bills or credit cards or checks, and so when you gave, it was loud. And for some of these people, they didn't necessarily go to the temple every week, and so they would be dropping these huge sums of money in there, and so it became a bit of a spectacle, a show, where people would make show of how much they gave, and Jesus would watch it, and he'd walk around the corner and he'd barf because it was so gross to him. And at one point, they were positioned near where one of these joy boxes, as some have called them, were stationed, and the giving was happening. And pretty soon, Jesus hits them on the shoulder, and he's like, hey guys, did you see that? And they're like, yeah, that guy with the big white beard and all the stuff hanging from him, yeah, that was a lot of money. No, did you see? And did you see her? And he kind of has to do that point through, this is awkward, we're staring at her. And he points out this widow. And if you're a widow in this culture, that's synonymous for poor, and so it's reasonable to think that she was dressed in clothes that weren't even customary and that weren't befitting of the temple, and surrounded by that much wealth and opulence, was probably staring at her feet and trying to move on as quick as she was. And did you see? Yeah, we see her. Did you hear that? Did you hear what? And then he says to her, go ahead. He says, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. And Jesus says, the guys are like, how is that even possible? And Jesus responds by saying, they gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all she had to live on. What is that? It's a percentage thing. God's not into amounts, he's into percentages. Listen, when you choose to flip the system, when you choose to put others first, God's kingdom first, your future kingdom second, and to live on the rest, you are behaving like your heavenly Father. That's what the text is saying. Like, if you're at all attracted to Jesus, if you follow him, central to what makes him so beautiful and so worthy of being followed is the fact that he always put others above himself. And we stand up here at Narrate every Sunday and we say, this is what we're about, putting others before ourselves. When you live this way, you become like your Heavenly Father. You become like one who's going, Lord, I trust you got me. I'm going to put you, I'm going to put others, I'm going to put my future before my toys. There's a rabbi, a guy named by the name of Rabbi Daniel Lapin. He's a modern rabbi. I really appreciate him, and he did a podcast on Dave Ramsey's Entree Leadership, which, if you're interested, it was the first one of the year. It's brilliant, a really, really good podcast all about finances. One of the questions that he's asked in the interview is, why give? And his answer I found to be so poignant. I think it's a great way to end this morning. He says, when you give, you become among the givers of the world, not the takers. When you prioritize giving in your life, that puts you among a very elite group of people. A group of people who says, I'm going to put others before myself. I'm going to make sure that I'm given more than I'm taking. So I challenge you. Will you go home? Will you say, hey, I'm going to give first. I'm going to save second. I'm going to live on the rest. And you know what? Your lifestyle is going to change. It's going to. You're not going to be able to afford some of the things that you currently afford. But you know what? Isn't it killing you anyway? Aren't you sick of being stressed out about money anyway? I love the way Dave Ramsey says it. He says, don't you make too much money to be stressed by it all the time? So will you go home and figure out what percentage do you live on? And if you have any suspicion about me and my motivation or this place, then give it somewhere else. But I dare you to try it. And then finally this, if you're someone here, and probably most of you are men, but this whole like deciding to follow Jesus or starting to follow Jesus, it's kind of ethereal and it's kind of feely and you kind of don't feel much. At least that's the way I am. Like, I can't even clap and sing, mostly because I'm not coordinated enough, but also because I'm just not a super emotive person. And sometimes you watch other people who are crying while they're singing and you're like, oh, I'm so weird. Anyway, sometimes the way to try Jesus is to just try him. Like, give him a shot. He says if you put others first financially, it opens the door to his involvement. So just try it. Try it for a month. Write it down in your journal. Create a reminder in your phone. Just do it for a month. Use that to determine whether or not it's true. And if a month from now you're not better, then, I don't know, hang it up. I dare you. Sometimes exploring Jesus involves going, okay, Lord, I'll try it. I'll try it. Let me pray. God, we're so grateful that you don't avoid the difficult topic of money. Lord, I pray that you wouldn't allow it to become a stumbling block to anyone this morning. I also pray, Lord, that obviously there's going to be people here who that your message to them has far more to do with priority than it does about money. And probably even people sitting in these chairs who more than likely by life circumstances are more raw than they've ever been, more raw than they've been in a long time, and are open to you. God, we're grateful that you've created this system where you've already made a move and you wait for us to make one. So would you help them understand what that looks like? Thanks for the cross. Thanks for the blood. Thanks for grace. Thanks, God, that your love isn't something to be earned, but something to be received. And yet that doesn't mean that we just have to do nothing in response. Thanks, God, that you are like any parent, that you love us before we do anything right, and that the key is finding security in your love. We love you. Amen.
Thanks, Adam, for the wrap on this series. So next week, we're starting a new series called Attuned, and we're really excited about it. We're going to look at what is Jesus' invitation to us, what's his dreams and hopes for us as people, and really unpack that and really dive deep into Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And a book that really helps flesh all that out is a book called The Divine Conspiracy, written by a guy named Dallas Willard. And if you haven't heard of Dallas Willard, well, now you have, but he's a brilliant Christian thinker and really helps flesh really the human existence and following Jesus and what that looks like for us. And so we have a staff have been reading it in preparation for the series, and it's provoked a lot of fun conversations. So we thought it'd be fun if we ordered a bunch of the books and you guys followed along with us. And so Adam, he typed up a reading plan that follows the series. So we invite you. We have a bunch of the books here and in the back lobby. They're $15, but we invite you to grab one, and that can look different for you in lots of ways, whether you grab one and you read it during your quiet time, or you grab a group of friends and you meet once a week and have these conversations about it. And then the third element that we created was we created 4 small groups with these great small group leaders that are going to meet once a week, different times and locations. So if you're new here and looking to get connected to a group, that's a great opportunity and can kind of scratch that itch for some of you that are looking for that. And I'll be quite honest, it's one of the harder books I've ever read. I read a page, I'm like, what? But it's very good, it's very rewarding, and it's a good book. So I encourage you to grab a book on your way out and sign up sheets for the small groups. Also, Easter egg hunt and filling opportunities, sign up sheets in the back. Also, if you're a guest here, we have a counter in the back specifically designed with you in mind. If you want to find out more about us or looking to get plugged in or connected, they would love to talk to you. Love being in the church with you guys. Bye.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.